Warning. Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I heard a laughing child moments before I heard a knock on my window. The next morning, I awoke to a broken window. Last night, it was around 11:30 p.m., and everyone in my house had gone to sleep already. Right now, it's just me, my mom, and my brother living in our house because my dad still has to go to work, and he doesn't want to risk exposing us with COVID-19, so he sleeps in our second home, which is a few minutes away. I'm a 21-year-old girl and I'm home from college, so I'm staying in my childhood bedroom on the second floor. My window is directly above the part of my backyard where my dad keeps trash cans to collect rainwater. It hasn't rained in the last couple of days, so the trash cans are empty. There are 3 trash cans directly under my window. All the lights in my house were off except my bedside lamp. I was in my bed texting some friends when I heard a faint screech directly outside my window. I stopped what I was doing and immediately turned off my lamp. Then I listened again, trying to figure out if it was a cat or child I just heard. I didn't hear anything, so I chalked it up to my imagination. But I was on edge as I've never heard a sound like that before. I kept my lamp off though, as I don't have any curtains, I only have vertical shutters, and light definitely bleeds through. A few more minutes pass, then I hear another noise, but this time it sounds like a child's laughter. I froze because I've read stories on Reddit about how people will try to lure unsuspecting victims by playing tapes of a baby crying. But I never thought it could happen to me, and I know my immediate neighbors on both sides both have young children, and I wondered if one of them somehow got out of their house. My window faces the neighbor to the right of my house, and our houses are relatively close together. I know they have a toddler. They also have a giant pit bull who spends some nights outside in their backyard. There's maybe 10 feet of space between our houses and we share a fence, so I get out of bed and cautiously walk over to my window. First, I only open my shutter a sliver as I don't want to be seen if there's someone outside. I can't see anything, but I heard the noise more clearly now. It's definitely a child's laughter, and it sounds close, so I open my shutter completely, trying to see who's making that noise. By this time it's almost midnight. But I don't see anyone, but I keep hearing the laughter. I try to look into my neighbor's yard, but I don't see anything, and I don't think their dog is out. I'm really creeped out now, so I go back to my bed, and try to go to sleep. I've laid one bed for about 5 minutes, when I hear a noise outside my window again. I don't know how to describe it, but the hairs on my arm and neck are standing up as I'm typing this. First, I heard a thud, then it sounded like someone was directly below my window moving the trash cans. I told myself it was probably my neighbor's dog moving around, but I knew it couldn't have been because whenever he's outside, he barks, and plus I didn't see him when I looked out my window. A few moments pass, and I breathe a sign of relief and relax a bit. Then I heard a clunk knock on my window, and I turned it up again. I was so scared I couldn't move, and I prayed that I was just imagining these noises. Then I heard a louder clunk, and I ran out of my room to my mom and told her what happened. My mom turned on all the lights and came to my room and looked out my window, but we didn't see anyone. Then she double-checked all our doors were locked, and she told me to sleep with her that night. So I moved all my blankets and pillows to my mom's room and slept there. Then today, when I woke up, I had already forgotten about the events of last night. I was in my room getting dressed. I was standing in front of my mirror and I saw something was being reflected on my carpet under my windowsill. I bent down to investigate and realized it was glass. I had a few picture frames by my window, and I thought one of them must have been knocked down when my mom and I looked out the window last night. So I look at each picture frame trying to see which one broke. I scanned through the frames once, then I feel my heart drop. I scanned through them again to make sure I didn't miss any the first time. All of my frames are intact and accounted for. I slowly reach for my shutters and pull them open. More pieces of glass fall at my feet and I feel sick. My window is partially broken. I scream and my mom comes and I show her my window. My mom asked how this could have happened as my window wasn't broken when we looked out it last night. And there's nothing in my backyard that could have caused that. My room is on the side of my house and on the second floor, and there are no trees on that side of my house at all. No trees in my neighbor's side yard either. There were also no dead animals or blood which would signal an animal crashing into my window. We don't have a security system or any security cameras, plus my dad can't even stay the night with us. I don't want to be afraid to sleep in my own room, so whoever broke my window, let's not meet ever. It was a long time ago before cell phones were prevalent and I was a female in my early 30s, who had just driven our kids to the pediatrician. The Macon, Georgia doctor's office was an hour away from our home, and I was just taking the 2 youngest of my 3, then ages 1 and 3 years old, to our scheduled appointment. Because we lived so far away, their office always gave us the last appointment of the day, and we were grateful. The doctor had just built a new building off of a fresh spur of the highway, so the location was quite isolated in every direction, but a very nice facility, compared to his old spot by the hospital there. His new building was also pretty far back on the new lot, and my car, a black Jeep Cherokee we had owned for 2 years, was one of only 4 or 5 cars in the parking lot when we got there. I parked near the front door, removed the kids from their car seats, and for the next hour or so we waited, saw the doctor, paid, and exited back outside. As I loaded the children in their car seats, the receptionist locked the glass doors, but when I tried to start the car, it wouldn't turn over. Gathering the children again, I knocked on the door until someone allowed us back in, and asked to borrow the phone to call a nearby garage for service. I found one in the phone book, and the man said that he would come, but that it might be a bit, so I told him my location, left to go back out to the car, rolled down all the windows, and loaded the children back into their seats as we waited. Soon we watched as all the lights were turned out in the building again, and everyone left, leaving us alone in the parking lot. As it was still light, I spent a lot of that time trying to tend to the children, digging through our car for snacks and a bottle, making sure that they weren't getting too hot, etc. Although the service station attendant said that it was probably going to be quite a while, I was pleasantly surprised when a truck pulled into the empty parking lot pretty soon, and a man got out of his pickup, smiled and nodded to me, and said he was going to raise the hood. He was middle-aged and a bit scruffy, but quite frankly many gas station attendants sometimes look that way, especially at the end of the day, and I was grateful when he began doing something under the hood almost immediately. I sat down again in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for him to tell me to try the engine, but he seemed to be taking a long time checking the connections, and I longed for him to just grab jumper cables, yet he never did. Without getting out of the car, I asked him what he thought was wrong, and he said, "Oh, it's just a loose wire, not the battery," and continued whatever he was doing. I couldn't see his face at all from where I was sitting, but his hands were visible through that long horizontal slit between the windshield and the raised hood as we waited. More than once, he said that it was merely a loose wire, and if I would just come up here really quick, he would show me which one it was so it would never happen again. I remember kind of laughing it off, though, and saying that sadly there was no reason to show me anything as I didn't know anything about cars. I just thanked him and continued to stay in the driver's seat, again just waiting for the inevitable signal to try to start the ignition that was most surely coming any moment. At one point I remember thinking that he was flirting, but I was trying above all to be polite and kind, as he was helping us. We were hot and tired and miserable, and truthfully most of my attention was on the children, and so I was distracted as well. And oddly enough he was starting to sound a little frustrated with me, because I wouldn't come up and look at the engine. I remember thinking that I certainly didn't want to make him mad where he left us there all alone with the sun sinking so quickly. And then the strangest thing happened. Another truck suddenly pulled into that desolate parking lot, and as it did, this nice guy working underneath my hood suddenly slammed it shut, ran to his truck, started it, and drove away very quickly, without even saying a word of goodbye. I was both confused and a little anxious when he did this, because I didn't know who was now arriving. I even remember feeling a little frightened that he had suddenly left me there alone with 2 little ones, defenseless. Why wouldn't he at least stay and speak to whoever was parking next to me now? It certainly seemed the Southernly gentleman thing to do. I looked around, and was very aware, once again, that there were no visible cars on the road, no homes or businesses were nearby, and the sun was continuing to set quickly. As this new pickup pulled in next to me, I got out of the car once again, apprehensively. Upon exiting, though, he immediately introduced himself, and his name and voice seemed to match who I had spoken to on the phone much earlier. He then actually called me by name, apologized for being so late, and, finally, smiled and stared towards the road asking who the man was that had just left so suddenly. Relieved and unfazed, I just laughed and told him, "Well, I don't know, I thought all this time that he was you." And we both laughed as he then grabbed jumper cables, walked to the front of my car, raised the hood, and started to hook up the battery terminals quickly. I immediately sat back in the driver's seat once more, suddenly grateful that, with luck, that air conditioner would be blowing full blast shortly, and once again checking the children. While listening for the familiar words, "Try it," I had my back turned towards the children, when he surprised me by suddenly walking to the driver's side door. In the strangest voice, he said, "Ah, ma'am, is this yours?" And when I looked into his hands he was holding a long, thin, dagger-like device that was about 1.5 feet in length. It appeared to be very old, and covered with reddish rust, yet on one end it had tiny small finger holes, as if it was a mix of a long thin sword and scissors, combined. I remember being amazed but not frightened, and I asked where he had found them. "Under the hood," he replied. "These weren't hidden somewhere in the engine, ma'am. They hadn't been there very long at all, cause they were sitting right on top. They must have just been put there." I shook my head no and smiled as I said, "But they're obviously very old and rusty," to which he pointed more closely and replied, "Yeah, but see how sharp they are. These look like they've just been sharpened." And when I looked down, he was right. I don't know why I hadn't noticed it before. The length was certainly long and dagger-like, but the sharpness was undeniably the most frightening quality. As I paid him, his final words to me were, "Ma'am, I don't know what was about to happen here, but I'm really glad I pulled up when I did." He quietly thanked me when taking the payment, told me that I needed to call the police whenever I got home safely, and then asked me where I wanted the item. I didn't want to touch it, so I released the back window and he placed it inside. We both then left the lot together, him turning one way, me turning the other towards the small highway that would lead home, still an hour away. I did, indeed, contact the police the moment that we arrived home, and I got the children inside safely. But although they listened politely, they declined when I offered to bring the scissor-like thing to them. The officer I spoke to said that they sounded as if they were specialized surgical shears from my description and measurements on the phone, which I found quite disturbing, as you can imagine. I had tried so carefully not to touch any of the surfaces, hoping that they might be able to lift prints or test the surface for blood, but they really didn't seem interested. The officer simply told me that it sounded as if I was very lucky, and that I might want to keep the shears for a few days, just in case someone from his office got back with me later. But that was all. I wrapped them carefully in newspaper and placed them in the brick storage unit behind our house, and they remained there for several more years untouched, until we finally moved away and threw them in the trash. But around that time, if you look through the news, women were going missing in Georgia, some never to be found. And of course, all these years later, it is still happening. I have often wondered what would have happened if the service station attendant hadn't arrived when he did. If my children would still have a mother. If I would have still had my son and daughter. If I would have missed all these years with them. I guess I'll never know, but I learned something about myself that day. I always felt that I was pretty aware of my surroundings. Pretty good at reading circumstances and staying safe. But because I was exhausted and tired and hot and stranded in a different city, my common sense and my intelligence simply left me for a bit and wasn't working at that time. And many of my friends and family still think that it could have cost us our lives. A kidnapping technique. This is my first post, and this happened a week ago. My blood still runs cold when I think about it. Keep in mind this isn't like any of the really scary stories on here, but it scared me, and it was definitely out of the ordinary. My brother wanted to get a drink from a place we both love to go to. It was going to close soon and he had work to do, so I went by myself. It wasn't very late, but it was already dark, and my parents had drummed into me since birth about the dangers of walking alone at night. I was kind of nervous that day, even though I've done it many times before. So I went and got both drinks and for some reason didn't get a bag. I was walking along with both hands full, bad idea. As I was walking towards the street where my house was, I suddenly became aware of two men very near me. One was in front of me, wearing a maroon pullover, and the other was behind me, wearing a gray zipped-up hoodie with the hood pulled up. I only turned around for a flash of a second, so I couldn't describe his face to you. I was weirded out because I was walking between them, and I was beginning to feel uncomfortably like they were trying to hurt me. And just I was telling myself that I was clearly overreacting, I came across a garage that was down an alleyway, and a black Subaru was coming out. I had time, so I crossed before they reached me. The person inside clearly wasn't counting on me doing that, so they swung around and parallel parked next to me, at most 2 feet away. So now I was between 3 men and a wall. When I saw the door open, that was it for me. I bolted and didn't stop running until I reached my house. So yeah, black Subaru driver, gray hoodie and maroon pullover, let's not meet.